Welcome everyone to episode 8 of Future Strong. Time is flying by, Lindsay. I cannot believe we're at episode 8, but wonderful to be joined today by Fred and Yuliya, who are going to help us tackle the topic of recruiting first-gen university goers, and I suspect some other things that we will throw at you. My name's Nikki Garchea, for anyone who is listening in for the first time, and I am the co-founder of a company called Capfinity. And Capfinity has an offering which is strengths-based and spans recruitment and development. And actually, for the last 15 years, we have been using strengths to really support first-gen talent into the workplace and helping organizations use strengths as an additional way to recruit, looking not just at academics. So a conversation very close to my heart, and I'm also a first-gen university goer. So really delighted to dive into this topic. My partner in crime, she doesn't know this yet, but we have hit already one episode alone, got 1,000 downloads the other week. So it's definitely something that people seem to be listening to on a Saturday morning, Lindsay. We are the coffee hour, but great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I learned something new about Nikki Garchea on every episode. Her birthday is New Year's Day, Fred and Yuliya, so that was a learning. And now I have learned, well, she ran out of hot water this morning, so we learned that, but she still looks fabulous. And now I know that she is a first-gen university student. This is a very special episode for me because Fred and Yuliya are both longtime friends of mine and so respected in our field of early career success and development. They are both first-gen themselves and have really dedicated their careers to supporting students who are in that demographic. I'll give you their official titles, and then I'll ask you to tell us your own stories. Yuliya Mykhaylovska. Yuliya is a native New Yorker, well, native Ukrainian and then native New Yorker. You'll tell your story. And currently the head of university talent at Greylock out on the West Coast. So Yuliya, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll do a little intro of Fred as well.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay. And I want to start off and thank you because it was your books and your advice that really helped me understand the worlds of careers. And so I know you've made a huge impact on the first-gen community and helping us understand how to go about the job search, how it really works, and what are actionable things to do. So as Lindsay mentioned, my name is Yuliya Mykhaylovska. I was born in Ukraine and my family immigrated to the US when I was 7 years old. I was a product of Brooklyn public schools growing up, and then attended a boarding school thanks to a scholarship and a academic enrichment program. And then I attended Stanford University and have worked in the startup and venture capital ecosystem since then, and also spent a few years working for Stanford University, running their internship program in New York. So I've had the perspective of being a first-gen graduate working in startups and venture capital, and then giving back to the university and college community.
So 2 fun facts. My mom was a Ukrainian egg artist. She was an art teacher. And so I grew up going to Surma on the Lower East Side and having Ukrainian art all around my home. So I feel a slight connection to the Ukraine. Yuliya is also a fabulous speaker. She spoke at a career services tech event at Princeton University, and she got up on stage and I said, "Who is that? I have to know that woman." So I'm so thrilled that you are doing so well and here with us today. We're also joined by one of my oldest and dearest friends, Fred Burke. Not old, dearest, oldest in terms of our relationship. Fred is the director of the Graduate Career Management Center for the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, which is part of the City University of New York. Fred, can you tell your story? And also for people who don't know about the CUNY system, can you talk a little bit about Zicklin and your experience there too?
Yeah, so the City University of New York is one of the largest urban systems with a long history of giving access to education. Up until the late 60s, the CUNY tuition was free. And right now we're running around $8,000 a year for New York City residents. So a very high quality education for a very low cost. And with that, we have a long history of giving access to first generation immigrant families and representing a lot of underrepresented groups in New York City, as well as outside of New York City, and has had a long history for that. So I grew up in upstate New York, and if I had thought that 30 years ago, I would be talking today about being a first generation college student, it'd be crazy. But I was the first in my family to go to school. I was lucky to go to a private college for undergrad. And I immediately fell in love with student services. I went to a program when I was a sophomore as an RA called Wow, I Can Do This for a Living. And I learned about higher education and student affairs. And that's how I got into my career, because as a first generation student without a family that didn't have the expertise in navigating career services, financial aid, registrar, I just took it all in as a sponge, and I wanted to tell others about my story. And I think we'll talk about this later, but when you're the first in your family to go, my brother and sister both went to college, my cousins, I was the first one to set the path, and that was the legacy in our family. So I'm happy to be here today, and I've enjoyed these webinars, so it's good to be on the other side this morning.
Yes, Fred is a loyal Future Strong fan. If I can start with the first question to Yuliya, and thank you both for those introductions. Yuliya, now you're on the recruiting side, right? You work with the startups that Greylock funds, and you can tell us a little bit about that role. We have a lot of people watching who are recruiters themselves, and this is not a topic that I think gets a lot of discussion. So can you talk a little bit about your role at Greylock and what your advice might be to organizations that say, yeah, I really do need to pay more attention to recruiting first-gen students? What's your advice?
Absolutely. So to answer your first question, Greylock invests in enterprise and consumer software startups. And so we have a variety of companies in our portfolio, from later stage businesses like Figma and Roblox to earlier stage companies like Truera and others. And depending on the stage of the company, there's different headcount and opportunities for students to join. So generally, the later stage they are and the more developed, the more likely they are to hire students, hiring a few dozen a year versus just one or two, a handful. And I think what's really changed in the last year in particular is that there's so many more resources for employers about how to recruit from certain groups, whether it's women or Latinx communities, et cetera, but there isn't a lot of information actually about recruiting first-gen students. And the pandemic has actually brought to light how different of an educational experience these groups are having. But there certainly aren't a ton of resources. I would love for you, Lindsay and Fred, to mention what things people can consult. But I actually do think that what the pandemic has done is it's leveled the playing field into who can attend events and meet certain employers. So I know when we were discussing some of the conversation for today, I had brought up that we have an annual career fair called Tech Fair, and Greylock has run it for 8 or 9 years. It's a fantastic way for juniors and sophomores to meet some of the portfolio companies we work with. And traditionally, pre-COVID, the before COVID period, this was always done in person. And because it's done in person, it's limited to people in the Bay Area. But with the move to everything being online, it's really opened the playing field, and people can join from anywhere at any time. And so the cost of attending, whether that's a train ticket or something else, that goes out the window. And so that's exciting. But I haven't seen too many resources become available to employers that focus specifically on the first-gen community. So I'm excited to see that change going forward.
Thank you. And by the way, you're welcome for all of the money that I have spent on Roblox, because my daughter spends, roughly 18 or 19 hours a day, and I seem to buy Robux all the time. So you're welcome. Please keep hiring and keeping it going. Fred, we actually met the head of recruiting at Roblox, and I was like, yeah, your job is funded personally by me. Okay, so Fred, resources. I think Yuliya brought up a really important point. Can you talk about, from the career services side, how you're supporting first-gen students?
Yeah, I think support is really important. I think, being the director of the Career Center, our role, and at least I see my role, as being a campus champion and really being tuned into student needs. And we know that first generation students often may not graduate. They may not finish their degree. There's a lot of struggles with staying in school and finding the connection, and feeling socially isolated on campus. And our role and really is to be supportive and provide confidence, and encouraging employers when they're on campus to look at first generation. And I know this past year the CUNY system, our new chancellor, has developed a new CFO council in New York City to really help elevate the profile of our students, to kind of get employers looking at first generation students. We know that these students are hardworking, they make their way through school, and there's a lot of good work ethic that comes from first generation. So our role on the campus side is to help advocate for students and get them out in front of employers, and just be there as a supporter. And then with that, career services offering some of the soft skills they may not have at home, mock interviews and virtual mock interviews now, and etiquette tips and things like that. Because if you're coming from a family that doesn't have that expertise, it's important to have it. I have become the campus tyer. I love at the career fairs tying ties, and I have been a regular contributor to the wardrobes on campus, and so it's great to have that. Yeah, Quinn just made a cameo in my conversation.
Cameo by Quinn the dog. Hi, Quinn.
Say hello, Quinn. Let's bring Quinn up.
They're all welcome on Future Strong.
I love it. I love it.
And Quinn's a rescue, so he's also first generation.
So first gen, first gen dog obedience school. Fred, you mentioned something about opening your campus to help students who might need space. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, as Yuliya brought up, sometimes you don't think about what might hold first gen back.
Yeah, I have to say the entire CUNY system has been very responsive during the pandemic, not only allocating technology and providing laptops to students that need them, but also we've made space available for students that need to go to a quiet location to do an interview or attend a career fair. And our undergraduate student affairs, student life has been very responsive, saying, hey, we're going to allocate a couple of rooms that students can request to have a quiet space to go and do an interview or attend a virtual fair. And that way there's no disruptions around them. So I think that's been a really good response to this pandemic.
And Fred, I think at first, when the pandemic first started, people were really concerned about disruptions and all these things. And I remember in May or so having a call with a student who said, hey, by the way, I'm calling you from my car. And I said, okay, no worries. Doesn't matter, as I can hear you loud and clear. It's all great. And people, and I would imagine particularly first gen students, were a bit shy. I'm working in a room where my family members are close by. And there were all these factors that maybe had people going into the conversation with a bit less confidence. But now, we've seen the lawyer look like a cat. We've seen so many crazy Zoom scenarios. Hopefully people feel a bit more relaxed about even going into the process and preparing, which is a good change. I think employers are very cognizant that everyone has had all sorts of Wi-Fi issues. So it's people aren't being docked for that as preparation for the interview. But the other thing, Fred, that I think career services programs within schools have done increasingly, and I just had an interaction like this earlier this week with UC Berkeley, is really bringing in employers to share a bit about their companies and career paths. So working in the tech industry, I think the tech industry is one of the most amazing places for social mobility. It is an industry that is growing at a very rapid pace. Even despite the pandemic, we've actually seen a lot more, just really amazing growth in some of these businesses that support the move to virtual world. And what sometimes first-gen students that I work with, what they don't know is they don't know much about the industry. How do you join? Obviously, joining a FANG company, whether it's Facebook, Apple, or Google, et cetera, these are clearer paths. You have movies like The Internship, so students know a little bit of what it's like to get into the door. But when it comes to joining an early stage tech company, there's a lot more ambiguity about it. And so I've loved seeing, like my colleague, Rebecca Anderson at UC Berkeley, she's putting together a program for her data science students who are first, for the specific cohort of first-gen students. And she reached out and said, could you please see if there are some employers, employees of Greylock companies who can talk about what it means to do data science at a Series B startup? And I think that's an excellent idea, because you can't assume that people understand these career paths in the same way that they understand what being a lawyer, doctor, et cetera is. And that's where I've seen a huge I think, disconnect, both working at the university side in my own experience and now working on the employer side. There's not a ton of information about what a day in the life of a business development rep is, or what a day in the life of a product manager is. And there is more information available, but not all students know where to find that.
Yeah, there's a couple of good points. I think humanizing the virtual setting is great. I love that, Quinn just made a cameo, or you see a spouse or a child, or, we're all dealing with many demands being virtual. I mean, I think there's a little bit more forgiveness with that area. But I think to your point, the whole career exploration part, is particularly for first generation, like not knowing what a career is. So, as early as your first and second year of school, allowing alumni and having panels and encouraging students to attend to learn about different careers. We saw the past couple of years a huge push in early identification. So these firms are looking at first and second year students, and it's great that they're so eager, but it's also these students don't have an idea of who they are, what they want to do, and it's a whole developmental piece that's not quite there yet. So how do we find a good balance with helping a firm identify early talent, but also helping students clarify, explore, and understand their skills, values, and interests so they can make a good career decision?
I'd love to just delve into that a bit more, Fred, and Yuliya, you might have views. One of the things we heard last week with Ray from Opportunity Network was that they were taking a quite holistic approach with their programs and actually reaching out to year 12 students, and the journey, was it year 12 or year 10? Year 10, I think, 10th grade, really early. And when we look at, we refer to it in the UK as social mobility, but a similar pattern, we think that there is a chance to impact the trajectory of those individuals if we can also create links really at high school. I don't know if either of you have a perspective on that, or if you've seen any good work in that space of the reach out coming really early ideas, what we're talking about.
I think, Yuliya, you're a product of that. Do you want to talk about the program that you were part of?
I am, and I think it's a very unique experience, and I wish there were more programs like that. But when I was in junior high school, I'm not sure how to translate that to the UK system, but I was around...
Everyone's got that. That's perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was around 11 or 12 years old, and as I mentioned, I was attending Brooklyn public schools, and I got early ID'd by a nonprofit called the Teak Fellowship that really works with first-gen and low-income students across New York City to help them access private education, and then provides a variety of pathways into different careers and colleges. And it was a game changer. It was so helpful because I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't even know that boarding schools existed. I didn't know about the level of support that some of these places could provide. And funny enough, and I'm very glad I was talked into the decision I was talked into, but I almost went to Stuyvesant, which is a wonderful public school in New York, but I almost went to Stuyvesant instead of the boarding school I attended because I knew Stuyvesant, I knew what it meant, but I didn't know what the boarding school perspective would be. So I had a ton of support from both the organizations that I worked with, but also from individuals who knew that I didn't actually realize the extent of how the opportunity to go to boarding school would be different. So there's a variety of early ID and academic enrichment programs, such as the Teak Fellowship, Prep for Prep, the Oliver program, et cetera. And what I've seen in both the college campus experience and then even in the recruitment experience is there's a difference between kids who have done these kinds of programs and who have not. And so somebody who's coming through a program like a Teak Fellowship or Prep for Prep, they've been through a ton more training. They also have advocates typically inside these organizations whose job it is to be the matchmaker between the employer and the candidate and really put the candidate in context, which really does help when you have someone go to bat and explain the strengths, et cetera, and they have a trusted relationship. So it serves as a referral in the workplace. Now, you have students then who come to universities who are not program kids, as we call it, right? And so it's a very different experience to, like, you could be first gen, but have had some resources that the average first gen student doesn't receive. And so I really saw that when I was attending Stanford, and then also with the students that I coached through Stanford. Some people have that leg up in their high school process to then hit the ground running in college. And some people spend the first few years of college trying to figure out how the system works. And that's a big discrepancy, I think, from what I've seen.
And
I want to jump in. Oh, Fred, yeah, go ahead.
And I think from our side, keeping an eye out, we look at student retention, we look at student success, we look at career services, but, making sure that the school is offering and students are using academic support, tutoring, the writing center, obviously career services, university advisement, and then also with all the mental health issues. I mean, we're seeing record numbers of students bring mental health issues to campus, and those could impact students, student satisfaction and being able to finish their degree. We know that I think about half of the students that are first generation don't finish their college experience. And how do we keep them engaged and they finish their degree and hopefully find gainful employment? So the support, whether you come from a system or not a system, is really important on a college campus.
This resonates so much with me. I am not first gen, but I did go to a middle of the road public high school. And when I got to Yale University, I was clueless because a lot of the kids had gone to boarding schools like Yuliya or elite schools. They had I'd never written more than a 5-page paper. They had written 20-page papers. They had done all the reading. So I think this is so much broader, right, than just this very small swath of people. Nikki, I know you had a question, but if I can just jump in briefly. Fred, you told a really powerful story to me once about how you didn't know anyone who had ever gone to graduate school. And so when you wanted to go to graduate school, you didn't know what to do. I really want to dig into this not knowing what you don't know. Can you talk about, Fred, how you advise first-gen students, even tying a tie? Yuliya, you talked about the technology access. Fred, can you tell that story and talk about the advice that you give to first-gens about finding out what you don't know how to do?
I think the tying the tie is one thing that I find such great reward in, because I wear a tie. I haven't worn a tie as much this past year, but most days, Lindsay, we have breakfast a lot. I'm usually in a tie going to work, and I think it's important to model what it looks like to dress professionally. And we've also donated. Tony and I have donated a lot of ties and suits and pants and shirts to the wardrobe closet. But that tying the tie and that conversation around tying the tie is so humbling, because that student feels confidence. And I think our role is to provide that confidence and support, and feeling good in that interview is so important, because that's one more check of support they have to succeed in the interview. So yeah, we talked about this for your book, Recalculating, but I wanted to go to grad school for higher education. I knew that I wanted to do student affairs and career services, and I had no idea what that was like. And I remember sitting down with a graduate school at my undergrad institution and just kind of going through opportunities, and then talking about assistantships and understanding how to get this paid for. And I was a hall director, which subsidized my education, and just asking for that help. But I think we have to keep those lines open so students feel like they can ask for help, because if they feel like they can't, they're not going to reach out. So I think access is really important, and making sure our colleagues are aware of these students and mindful of their needs, because they may not be falling into the mainstream. And I think, to your point, Lindsay, with elitism, I worked at an elite school for a number of years, and, students that don't have that background are lost in the shuffle, because there's this perception that if you're not elite, you're not part of the group. And I think you have to be very mindful of that as well.
Really, really great advice, Fred. One of the things that has come up just today for me is a large corporate talking about wanting to recruit more first-gen students, but actually needing to take stakeholders on that journey of why to invest in those students. Fred, something you said early on in this conversation was just characteristically some of the good things. And I don't want to just stereotype about, first gen students, but it's something that we do see in the UK as well. It'd be great just to hear from both of you of really the benefits of investing in first gen students, and what's some of the things, some of the cases you make. If examples of people who are doing this well, then, please share as well. The listeners love an example.
I think these are 2 examples, but go ahead.
Yuliya, do you want to go first? You want me to start off? Okay. I mentioned earlier, we're always looking at employers and opportunities, and we've done some studies looking at our alumni to see how long they stay at organizations. And some of the themes that come up is, I think, the first generation student that gets a really good job out of CUNY or Baruch. Baruch is also one of the top 10 schools for social mobility. Those students tend to stay a long time at the employer. And doing a couple of focus groups on this data is that our students will, get a job. They're grateful for the opportunity. They will move up and be a lifer. There's not the sense of entitlement, or I'm going to job hop for the next best thing. I've gotten a really good job out of my Baruch education. I have a great salary, more than my family's salaries ever was, and I'm going to stay there. And because of that, there's a level of gratitude and a sense of being able to move up in the organization. So I think initially, like, our role is helping prepare and doing some of the soft skills and make sure that they're competitive. But once they get in the door, our students really flourish in the organization. And that's great to see, because we want to see, like, longevity and retention at organizations. And we find our students, they get an opportunity, they stay and they move up, and they have a long career at an organization.
I think that's an excellent point. And on the point of startups and first-gen students, I think first-gen students are very uniquely positioned to succeed in a startup setting, where you have to be very resourceful and think quickly on your feet, build relationships with all sorts of stakeholders to get the impossible done. So there's a lot of characteristics that are, you would want any employee, but that level of motivation and the gratitude for the job, as Fred mentioned, those are definitely factors that come into play when you think about recruiting as well.
And it's hard to break the nut when schools are very limited into who they recruit from. So they have their 10 target schools. And if you're not a target school, how do you break down that barrier? So it's often, getting a couple of our best students and advocating and say, take a look at this, or working with alumni to develop alumni champions that are helping knock on human resources door and say, hey, come back to my alma mater. Let me come back on campus. And I think for first gen students, having somebody come to campus who was in that role is a very powerful story, whether it's someone who's underrepresented, somebody from a diverse background, somebody from a different gender, someone LGBTQ, having that person come back and tell their success story is very powerful for undergrads who are first generation.
Fred, I think your point around target schools is also a great one, and it's something that's changed during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
So I've seen, of course, people cannot travel right now. It's not as safe. And so before, some employers were limited to their 20 schools because that's what they would send their 4 university recruiters to go recruit from. Now that everything is digital, it's a lot cheaper to recruit. And so I do think it opens up a wider variety of schools. Last year in July, when we held our 8th or 9th annual tech fair with Greylock, we saw a double-digit percentage increase in how many schools were represented. But I also had to advocate and explain to some of the employers, hey, you might not know this school, but they have really great students, great programs, et cetera. So I think there's a part around bringing in new schools and programs. And I think as employers see the results and they make those hires, they make those offers, they see those same students doing excellent work during coding reviews, et cetera, there will be even more openness. And so I really do see this as a silver lining of the pandemic, that there's going to be a lot broader number of schools represented, particularly from the perspective of West Coast employers looking into East Coast and schools in the South and the Midwest. The tech engineering campuses are not just located in the Bay Area. That's what they've traditionally been targeting. But I see schools like Williams, where now computer science is like the number 2 or number 3 major. And that's not a school that would have been on an employer's radar a few years ago. But as the jobs landscape has changed and as tech has grown, I think students have adapted to that. They've taken majors in those fields, and employers are starting to see that those students aren't just in those traditional target schools that they traditionally think of.
Absolutely. We just revised our undergraduate curriculum. Our MBA curriculum was revised 3 years ago. I think having employers be part of those curriculum changes are really helpful. And I think I don't want to call out banks and employers, but I know a lot of employers that come to us say that they love that they can just kind of back up the bus to Baruch because the students are motivated, they're hungry, they're eager, they're ready to go to work, which is great. But then some banks will call and say, hey, I've been targeting 3 or 4 schools, but we're not really getting what we'd like, and they're not staying. So let's talk about that. So we have an opportunity to have a strategic partnership planning meeting to look at how we can develop a pipeline, and then that yields better opportunities for our students. So it allows career services, the dean, the president, all to be part of these conversations to show the value of hiring from our institution.
So as we come to the end, and Nikki, I'll leave it to you to wrap up. I just want to say that I'm flashing that I have had breakfast with both of you separately at the Smith on the Upper West Side. And now I think it should be the three of us getting together when the pandemic is over to have breakfast, because I could talk to both of you all day. And I think we all sat at the same table too. So thank you so much for your advocacy, for being a role model for first gens and those of us who want to support them. Just thank you for your time. Nikki, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, just to echo that, I think anyone listening now or back to this will find both of your stories so inspirational, and also just so much learning that they can take both from the career service side, but also within wider organizations. And Yuliya, I love your points about first gen in startups. As a first gen who had a startup at 27, there's some things that it puts you in good stead to do. You've both spoken a little bit about preparation, and I would love to direct people to the Capfinity V platform, which is all to do with leveling the playing field for first gen and unrepresented talent. Thank you, Lizzie. You've got capfinity.com V there. And what we're really hoping to do with that platform is get into the hands as many first gen students as we can, things like strengths profile, access to how to develop different types of capabilities that you've discussed on here. So be great for people to use that as a resource. Thank you so much for your time. I know people will reach out to you both on LinkedIn, and we really value the contributions that you've both made. And Lindsay, as always, thank you. We look forward to next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.